blurring the lines between real life and Second Life. Bringing you in-depth information about the people behind the avatars. Giving you insight like you've never heard before. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Fourth Wall with Paul and BK.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Fourth Wall. I am the scumbag superstar Paul Slater, my co-host BK Tigerfish, and his lovely partner Z. And welcome back for another episode of The Fourth Wall. How do you think the first episode went, BK?
Well, I was actually very pleased at how it went, and I'm hoping that everybody that listens to it enjoys it, and they're going to tune in for this episode. And speaking of the last episode, we dove a little bit into our past. We dove a little bit into the SL, and we brought a little bit of the RL into it, saying things that we had seen and things that we had that caught our attention. So I think we really need to talk more about the men, the guys, the people behind the avatars, because we had to get started somewhere. And the fact that you're from Philadelphia, and stories that you had told me about you actually going to the original ECW arena and getting to have interactions with the ECW OG. You talked about talking about Paul Heyman, you talked about the Dudleys,
Yep.
You talked about being able to interact with all those guys. So before we get to that, the question that, and this is going to be this pretty much going to be across the board. It doesn't matter if we're talking to each other or if we're talking to guests that we, potential guests we may have in the future, because even Z can relate to this. What was the first time? What actually happened that caught your attention, that got you interested in professional wrestling?
I know the exact first time I ever. So I mean, it was between WrestleMania 1 and WrestleMania 2. And I was 8 years old, maybe 7, 8 years old. And it was Saturday morning. I turned on the TV. I was flicking around as I would watch cartoons or whatever. And here in Philly, it's Channel 29. And that was like, right now it's Fox. It's Fox. But back then it was just a regular local channel. And they had Saturday Morning Superstars on. And I watched. And it was Ricky Steamboat and Don Morocco were wrestling. And Don Morocco hung Ricky Steamboat from the ropes, threw him over with a belt. I think Mr. Fuji gave him, or somebody gave him a belt, and hung him, like literally hung him over the ropes. And I was like fascinated by it, because like this guy's murdering this guy on national TV and no one's doing nothing about it.
Right. And now correct me if I'm wrong. That would we're talking about Ricky. That would have been in the NWA.
No, this was WWF, and it was. I remember the next thing I watched, it was not long after this, the next thing I watched, I remember kind of vividly, was when King Kong Bundy and Hulk Hogan, it was on a Saturday Night's Main Event, and Bobby Heenan, I think, or I forget who it was, but somebody held Hogan into the turnbuckles, into the corner, and Bundy splashed him like 4 times into the corner. And they were like, oh no, is Hogan going to be able to be ready for WrestleMania 2? It was like that WrestleMania 2 was when they had it in like 3 different locations. And one was in New York, I think one was in Chicago, the other one I think it was in LA maybe. And
yeah, I remember
Hogan and Bundy was the main event. And like that was like my first WrestleMania. I didn't watch it live. I remember when the VHS came out, my mom let me rent the VHS, but that's how far back I go. And then into that I got into the NWAs, which I really fell in love with wrestling.
Well, I can relate to that, because back in the day, before pay-per-views, became pretty much the standard for, for wrestling shows, you had to have a satellite, or you had to have a cable outlet,
or go to a movie theater.
Yeah. And one of the things was that, you were paying exorbitant amount of money. I think, and I don't remember how much it was, because my family was never able to afford anything like that. And so I had to do like you did. I had to wait for the video record, the VHS, the videotape to come out, so I could go and rent it from the local store and watch what was going on. And what was really funny was there was some buddies of mine that we were really big into wrestling. I mean, we would do stuff like, in all honesty, this is no joke, we would take, back in the day when we used to have brown paper bags for grocery bags, we used to take them. Yeah, we used to take those things, and we would cut them to where basically the two bigger sides would lay down. So we would cut it into strips, and then we would take and cut those strips into things that look like belt straps, and then we would get pieces of cardboard, cut them out into squares, and we would write on there, world heavyweight champion, whatever, and then we would two sides tape and put it on there, and we would actually wrestle in our backyard.
Wow, yeah, we did that too. Like, going back to what you were saying about the pay per view. The first ever pay per view I ever watched in my house was WrestleMania 3, and that was Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan. And I remember it was like cable kind of was just coming about, like in my neighborhood. Like we had Comcast started in Philadelphia, which is Xfinity now. So it started in Philadelphia. I remember they started this whole cable thing, and my mom, we got cable, was like maybe a couple months before WrestleMania 3. And you could get the pay-per-views on that. And my mom's deal was, and my dad, well, usually my mom was a disciplinarian, my dad, whatever. But my mom's deal was, I had my report card in like a month or two before that. My mom's like, if you get a good report card, I'll get you WrestleMania 3. We'll get it here. And I remember like that was like a motivation for me, because like I was like really into wrestling at that point. Like I had all the wrestling figures. I had all they were rubber figures back then, but I had everything. And I used to go to here at the Spectrum. I remember I was at a show, and it was really cool. Like, it was the very first wrestling show. It was leading up to WrestleMania 3. Or no, it was after WrestleMania 2. And we went to a show, me and my dad and my cousin and my uncle. And the main event of the show was Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan versus Big John Studd and King Kong Bundy. And I thought, and I was like, I was amazed. It was like, it was nothing I ever experienced before. Like, I always been a big baseball fan. I've been to a lot of big baseball games, but like that first time seeing wrestling and seeing like Hulk Hogan, a lot of people don't realize now, because you have this younger generation now, especially in SL wrestling, the people you talk to, you still have people like us who are older, like our age, but you have a lot of guys that are younger, a lot of men and women who are younger, and they don't understand the impact that Hulk Hogan at that time had. I mean, he was as big, if not bigger, in the United States at least, than Michael Jordan at some points. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
He was huge.
And that was in the 80s, and then it took until right at the mid-90s for anybody to get close to him, and of course we all know who that was.
Right, and like
he got surpassed. But look how long it took for them to bring around another generational star.
Right, and then like people don't understand. Like, they look at Hulk Hogan now for the things he's done in the past, racial things, said, all that. And yeah, I get that, all that's awful. But like, you're looking back into the '80s, he was the man. Like he was a real life superhero. Yeah,
he was wrestling. He was wrestling. All you had to do, it didn't matter if you watched it. It didn't matter. At the time as a kid, I had no idea that wrestling was set up the way that it was. I'm watching it and I'm thinking, okay, these guys are really beating the hell out of are beating each other up. And it wasn't until I realized, no, wait a minute, just 4 days ago, your head was busted wide open and you don't have a Band-Aid on. That's kind of, but that was after I got older. But at any time, all you had to do was say Hulk Hogan, and it didn't matter who you were. You knew who Hulk Hogan was.
Everybody knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. Yeah,
exactly. And but
that's the one thing. Like, that's the one thing, though. Going back, like, real quick with Hulk Hogan, like, where I mean, Austin and The Rock. I mean, The Rock now especially, but Austin, he had that. Everybody knew who he was, and he was cool and everything. But like, my grandparents at that time knew who Hulk Hogan was. Like, my mom and dad, like in the late '90s, they really didn't. They didn't know who Steve. He wasn't the name, like the household name. That Hulk Hogan was on everything, commercials. He was on Saturday Night Live. He was on everything. You know what I mean? Austin surpassed him, but I don't think Austin was as big as popularity as Hulk Hogan was.
Well, that is true, because they had. I think you just mentioned it. For those of us who do remember, there was that Hulk Hogan Saturday morning rock and wrestling cartoon.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, they had that. And then, it got to the point where everywhere you turn, Hogan was the first mainstream, like you said before, international star, where everybody knew who he was. Even if it, yeah, and one of the things, in all honesty, one of the things that helped him at the time was the Rocky movie that he played in.
Yeah.
Don't forget
Thunder
he played the Clover Lane, right? No, Clover Lane. What was the
You're right,
the
Mr.
character
T.
that he played?
He
What
played
was it?
Thunder
No, well,
Lips.
yeah, Mr. T.
Thunderlips.
Yeah, right. Okay, and and in that particular scenario for that movie, he was at that time, even in his professional wrestling career, he was a heel.
Yeah.
And he made many comments that after that movie, there was people that would make comments to him about, why would you do, kids basically, why would you do that to Rocky? Or how can you be so mean that you would do that to Rocky? And then he realized, you know what? Wait a minute. And then he basically stumbled in the fact that he could turn face. But that movie and him turning face and, eat the prayers or eat your vitamins, say your prayers, and all that stuff, that was like a cornerstone of I mean, I don't know, this popularity, even the term to use for him.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was like all you had to do. You didn't even have to tell anybody his name and just show them a picture. They knew who it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny though. Like, I was pretty early in my life. I mean, even before I probably turned 10, I was told wrestling was fake. Like, I was told it was all scripted, and I never I remember at first I didn't believe it, and like my brother had a friend who worked at the Philadelphia Spectrum, and down in Philly, which was it's like a legendary arena, in Philadelphia. But that WWE would be there. WWF at the time would be there every month, and my brother actually had pictures that his friend took of like the Iron Sheik and Hulk Hogan talking to each other, like stuff like that. And it was like I didn't want to believe it right away, but I was like, all right, I kind of knew it was a TV show. But then what fascinated me, there's a point for all this, my rambling. What fascinated me about it, what got me fascinated is, wow, man, like, how do they come up with this stuff? Like, how do they figure out the match? How do they figure out the story? How do they figure out doing, like, I got on that very early, like, in my life, like, very, very early. And especially, like, going to NWA, because NWA, in my opinion, they'll never get the credit because WWF is, but NWA was so much better than WWF at that time in the 80s. With the Horsemen, the Horsemen, Dusty Rhodes, Nikita Koloff, Magnum TA, because it was more real and not a comic book. Like, there was times where, even though at that age I knew it was scripted, I knew it was, make believe, but NWA made it seem so real. And I know you appreciated that too, because you and I talked about that a lot. Like, they made that look like, wow, man, Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair may not like each other. You know what I mean? Like, they made you feel that way in like every show.
Oh, well, absolutely. But before we go further into that, we'd actually started this episode where we were talking about, how we got into it. And this is my favorite story to tell. I got introduced to wrestling by my grandfather. God rest his soul. He's not been with us since 1988. But it was always funny, and we called him Big Daddy. For a long time, I mean a long time, we have to realize, whatever they say that you start having memories or you can actually remember stuff, depending on the age. But for a while there, growing up around him and all, I never understood what he was doing. And what it was is my mom would always take us over to our grandparents' house on Saturdays. Now, I've mentioned this before, that wrestling that I grew up watching, that Memphis wrestling, where I watched a bunch of these other people come up, like, when The Rock was Flex Kavana and Steve Austin first came in, and he wanted to go by Steve Williams and he couldn't. Yep. And as everybody knows, very familiar with the documentary about Dr. Death Steve Williams being there and how Steve Austin came to be. And people know the We the People,
Dutch Mantel.
Jack Swag, yeah, Dutch Mantel is his name, but most people knew him as what they call him, whatever they called him when he was
Zebediah, I think, something like that.
Yeah, well, in Memphis, he was Dutch Mantel, Dirty Dutch Mantel, and I watched Sting and the Ultimate Warrior, who that's what everybody knows them as, but at one point in time they were actually a tag team called the Blade Runners.
Yep.
So I watched stuff like that, and we would always go over there, and the show was always on from 11 a.m. until 12:30 noon or 12:30 p.m. on Saturdays. It was a live show. It come out of Memphis, Tennessee, which is a little over an hour down 55 from where I grew up. And she would always bring us over, and my grandfather has, dads, men, grandpas. They have that one chair. It doesn't matter if it's a recliner. It doesn't matter what it is. That's their chair, right? So my grandfather would always be sitting on the corner of the chair. It was a recliner. He would have it down in the normal chair position, and he'd always be sitting on the corner of his chair that was closest to the TV. Now later on in life, of course, the TV, he had to move the chair closer because of his eyesight and everything else. But you would see him, and when they were doing the promos, he was so intent. It was like he was studying what they were saying. Then it didn't matter who was in the match, and they would bring in the matches, and they had matches every for the show itself. But they're always doing this talking because in Memphis it was one of those things that how like we're talking about stories leading up to WrestleMania, stories leading up to SummerSlam and all that. Well, in Memphis it was wrestling every Monday night at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, Tennessee. And if you were within a 2-hour driving distance of Memphis, that place was packed every Monday night because of what they were doing on the Saturdays, because you had the live show on Saturday where you could do all your promos. You could do all your trash talking. And then 2 days later, you get to go into the arena and watch them do it, and watch them perform it. And he was always studying. Well, then when it didn't matter who it was that got in the ring, he would always sit there, and all of a sudden his arms, he never like threw a punch, but his arms were like tucked into his, and all of a sudden you see his wrist, his hands, his fists, he'd start moving, he'd start doing that, and then all of a sudden the foot would start kicking out. And Big Mama, my grandmother, I remember that I would always go in there because I wanted to be with my grandfather. He was a big influence in my life, and I remember later on, I don't know how many times it was done before, she would pick me up and she'd like, now, Brian, he's going to kick you into that TV if you get too close, because, he was doing all the moves and all that. And then, of course, later on, I knew to stay away. And that's how I got introduced to wrestling, was not actually watching the show, but watching my grandfather watch wrestling. So that's how I got involved.
I mean, that's better story than I have. I just was flicking the channels one day and I came across it. But I'm the youngest in my family, so it was like my brother's 10 years older than me. I remember watching it like, why do you waste your time watching this nonsense? It's all fake. Like that's all I heard all the time, But I still loved it, man. I loved it. And then once we started getting in cable, going back to what I was saying, I guess it was probably like, it was late, probably like maybe 1988, 87, 88. We got the TBS channel, which at the time, TBS was basically just localized in Georgia area and Atlanta, Georgia. We were getting it up here in Philly. And that's when I found, NWA, Saturday night they would have. And I'm like, wow, what's this? I remember it was kind of, they would show, it wasn't like they turned it into where it was like a show. Back then it was like they would show you everything that kind of happened that you missed, and they would have some matches, and like, I was hooked then. That NWA hooked me.
Right.
More so than WWE. And then, that's where I learned, like, I was really fascinated by that. And then it goes into like the 90s of finding ECW. Which really,
right?
Because you go into the 80s and 90s. You know this. I have me and my one buddy. At the time in the 80s, everybody loved wrestling. All my friends, everybody in school, everybody. As it started progressing, it started getting less and less interesting. I guess there was more cartoony, to where it was like you had to keep a secret to watch wrestling because it was embarrassing at some points. And me and my buddy,
which one you were watching.
Me and my buddy, who, I told you about my buddy. He's the one I share all my stuff with, to tell what he thinks and everything. Me and him are the only ones.
Was he the one that you shared the videos when we first started when we brought Insidious in
Yep.
to okay.
And he's the one I always share everything. But me and him growing up, we were the only two that stuck with it. You know what I mean? Like it just stuck with it, even though it was as dumb could be at some points where you had monsters and zombies and all this crazy nonsense. But we stuck with it. And then I remember when like the Attitude Era hit off. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but when the Attitude Era off, everybody started getting back into wrestling, and I felt like I had this ownership of it. Like, yo, get out of here, dude. Like, I was watching this stuff when Mantar was walking in the ring with this 90-pound freaking thing on his head, you know?
Yeah. And then, of course, who could forget the gobbledygooker? So, I mean, we're coming up on Thanksgiving.
Like all that nonsense.
Who could forget to... Now, one thing that we've been sitting here is, Z sitting over here, and Z being from Florida, she's down around the Tampa area. I'm not going to say specifically where, because, she knows where I sleep and she also knows where my RL sleeps. But she is the one that we first met. And we got to talking about when I, because I'd already kind of started getting into the wrestling a little bit before she and I, become what we are now. And she actually has some stories where she got in. She's actually a wrestling fan, and and I'm gonna let her tell some of the stories. One of the favorite stories that she has, and I believe it's true, is the fact that her exact words is Jerry Lawler's an asshole because she met the motherfucker.
Oh, that man! Oh my God! I realize a lot of the beefs in wrestling are absolutely scripted, and the guys are actually the best of friends. It's kind of like the two of you. Lawler is just a douchebag. He is a complete douche as a person. So he makes the perfect heel because he doesn't have to pretend. He really is a douche.
He seems like such a nice guy. He has that that man, like when you see him in like shows like outside of wrestling, he always he has like a big smile on his face and everything.
See, that's where he's acting, though. That's where he's acting. I mean, the man may have changed since then, because God knows I'm not the same person I was at that point.
Well, I mean, the guy did have a heart attack. I mean, the guy did have a heart attack during a show.
Yeah,
so it probably changes perspective a little bit.
Maybe it straightened him out a bit, but at that point in his life and his career, he was a douche.
Okay, so you've met. Okay, so now the question is proposed to you, Z. What happened, or what got your attention that you watched your ever first professional wrestling, whether it would be live or whether it was on TV? What got your attention?
This is absolutely terrible because I sit here and I listen to your stories of how you got into wrestling, and mine is so much more shallow and ridiculous.
Well, it can't be any worse than Paul. I mean, Paul pretty much said, like a Stone Cold said in his interview, he said, "I'll never forget the day I slipped through the channels and I came across professional wrestling." So we got Paul. So we got Paul basically living out a moment of Stone Cold Steve Austin's life.
I mean, that's the truth, though. I mean, it wasn't nothing special.
So how shallow could your answer be?
I was a painfully awkward, introverted preteen.
Okay.
And I didn't quite fit into any group. I wasn't a jock. I've never been really overly interested in most sports. Okay. It's just not my personality. I didn't fit with the jocks. I couldn't stand the cheerleaders. I wasn't super smart, so I didn't fit in with the brains. I never got into D&D, so I didn't fit with the geeks.
Yeah, because you actually want to get laid in real life. Right?
Well, I did develop that interest pretty early, too. We'll skip that.
Okay.
That was when high school hit, man. I can't tell these girls that I like wrestling.
But I was an introvert. I was even at that age a complete bookworm. Nothing that really fit in with anybody else. But being the preteen, you're getting the interest in the opposite sex. And having never actually shown any kind of interest in sports in any way, my parents noticed when I started paying attention to wrestling. And like you say, Hulk Hogan was one, he was a household name. His reach extended so far beyond wrestling that it was ridiculous. And honestly, the first thing that grabbed my attention about wrestling, it was hot, buff guys barely dressed, beating on each other. So, I mean, at that point in my life, I'm not one of the popular people. I don't have access to these types of people in my real life. And all of a sudden, here every Saturday morning, I have a chance to watch mostly naked guys beating on each other. And then, like I say, I'm a complete bookworm. After they grab my attention by being barely dressed, then the storylines started to grab me, because my way out of being awkward was to become a scrapper. I fought a lot with everybody. And I was the one sitting there, okay, so these two guys are beating on each other. Why? What's behind it? Why are they doing this? And then I start paying more attention to the storyline. My parents noticed that I'm getting involved and interested in this, and it became an outing for my mother and I when the local shows would come through. And I'm not in one of the busy areas of the state. We're a little bit out of the way, so we got a lot of the backyard feds. The ones that we always used to joke about it, saying it was the guys on the way up and on the way out.
Oh, well, I mean, in a way,
Florida was like. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I'm not in one of the big cities. I'm about an hour outside of Tampa, little no place area, but it was within range. And it was something I was showing an interest in, and my mom wanted ways to spend time with me, so she and I would go to the local shows, and I got to meet some wonderful people and some assholes. Like I say, Jerry Lawler was a complete douchebag. He came through, met him, absolute douche. One of the sweetest people I met was Bam Bam Bigelow.
Oh,
he was
really?
An absolute doll. That man was the sweetest thing you've ever met in your life.
You know, it's always funny. You know, what's the saying? You know, don't meet your heroes.
Yeah, I never do.
Yes.
The thing about it is, though, it's always weird that. Okay, so Jerry Lawler, and you know, I can use him because I'm basically from the same area that he's from. You know, you would think that he would be a more cordial, gentlemanly type person because of, you know, basically from the South. Because the thing about it is, Jerry, even with all the money that he made with WWE, one thing that he used to, and this is when I realized just how much everybody depended on each other. He had been introduced to the WWE at the time, WWF fan base, because they used to have this show that came on USA Network, and it would come on at like, I don't know, it's like 11 o'clock or midnight. And it was called, what was it called? Titans or something?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It was like Titans or something like that.
It was something like that, but it was basically a WWE talk show is what it was. And
TNT.
Bobby Heenan was on. Was it? Yeah, maybe that's what it was. And Bobby Heenan was on there, and of course Vince was on there. You know, he, you know, basically sitting at the head of the table. And they brought this whole thing in, and they were, you know, and Bobby was like, I got a surprise. And they brought Jerry Lawler in. Now, Jerry Lawler come in dressed in his king attire, you know, his wrestling gear. But as you know, he did more commentating than anything else. And then it was like I saw that. I think that come on at like 11 o'clock on a Friday night. I see that, and then the next morning on TV, live TV, he's there, and he's going through this whole thing about, yeah, I got this call from New York, or I think WWE, the headquarters in New York at the time before they moved to Connecticut. And they come off with this whole, yeah, I got a call, and they see how great the King is, and I had to make an appearance up there, and I didn't really want to, but they, they offer me, this first class plane ticket, and they were just going completely off about, I'm from the South, I don't like anybody from the North, and then, and then of course when he would go up to do his shows up there, the recordings, he would still put on that whole thing about, okay, I'm still from the South, I still got to talk shit about the Yankees, and and this and that and everything else. And I'm not talking about the New York Yankees, just, the Yankees in general. And that's when I kind of realized, okay, you're going to go up there and be on one TV show, then you're going to come down here, you're going to talk this, and you're going to go up there. There's no way they're just going to let you walk around and just go in there and talk. And that's when I realized that there was a lot more to it than what we just saw on TV. But back to what I was saying is that you would hear, Lawler doing that, and you think, okay, cool. He's from the South. He's a cool guy. And you expect Bam Bam Bigelow, who's this big, burly, biker-looking guy, to be like, you get the hell out of my way, and he turns out to be just the opposite.
Absolutely, yes. He was one of those that it's the basic skinny DJ with a big voice. He was...
Yeah.
You would expect him to be so much different by his appearance and the way he's portrayed, but he was one of the sweetest people that you could meet.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. I mean, man, probably the worst person I've ever met wrestling-wise was Bubba Ray Dudley. I mean, he was...
Yeah, you were telling me that you had a run-in with him outside the ECW
he was
arena,
just
right?
very rude. And, I mean... Like, I get it. I get it. I mean, you got to understand. Like, I try to look at their perspective. Like, you have people bothering you all the time. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to catch everybody on their best day. I mean, but, I mean, he was, Devon Dudley was really cool, really nice guy. And Bubba Ray was just like, get the F out of my way. Like one of them type of guys. New Jack was another one. Complete.
Yeah, I heard lots of stories about New Jack.
Probably the best guy I probably ever met was probably Shane Douglas. He was cool, and I talked to him a lot, and he, I mean, he's the one that was like, "What do you think they would do here?" Because he was like a teacher in real life, and I guess he always had like when he would talk to people, like it was like kind of like an education. You know what I mean? Like, why do you think they're doing that? Why do you think the psychology? That's where I kind of learned. But the psychology of wrestling, man. You know what I mean? Like, and just certain situations, why things are done in certain situations in wrestling. So he was cool. But like, even though I went there like a lot, I never met Paul Heyman. Like, I seen him a few times, never met him. Like, I met Chris Jericho.
I thought you said that you had the opportunity.
No.
Sorry about that.
He would. He would always show up like an hour before the show started, and then you wouldn't see, like, he'd be like in the director thing, like doing like I guess the grill position ECW, which was on a perch, like in the corner of the it was a bingo hall. It was like in the corner of the arena, and he would always be up there. But Chris Jericho, I remember the conversation I had with him, and it wasn't even at the ECW arena. It was at a gymnasium, like literally right around the corner from my house, and it was funny because it was in 1996. I had just seen Kiss reunion tour in Philly, and I had the shirt on, the Kiss reunion tour shirt on. I went to the show, me and my buddy, and the way the gym was set up is you walked down steps to get into the gym, you walked up the steps to get out, and like they had half of the steps cut off where the wrestlers would come out, and then the fans would come on the other side going out. When you go out to the door, there was like an open area where you could see them and everything. So we were leaving. It was at the end of the show, and I think the main event of the show was Shane Douglas and Tully Blanchard. And Chris Jericho was standing up there, and I went up there to grab a drink. I was walking back, and Chris Jericho was like, "Yo." He's like, "Is that a Chris reunion show?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "I was just there last week." I didn't even know who he was. And
Oh,
I'm
really?
like, no, I didn't know who he was. He had just showed up to ECW. He was like in Japan. Like I didn't even know who he was. And I'm like, yeah, man. Like I just went to the show and we were talking for like 5 minutes about Kiss. And he's like, yeah, I've been wanting to go to the show. And he was living in Tampa, Florida. And I missed your show. And like we were going back and forth, just like talking like regular people. And then like a week later, maybe not a week later, but a few weeks later, he's on WCW. I'm like, holy shit, I had a conversation with that dude 2 weeks ago in my high school gym. You know, it was kind of surreal. Like, and then he became, I never thought he would become who he became, but, and that was really the only time I ever met him. But like, you know, I mean, like Z said, like the guys you weren't expecting to be nice guys were really usually the nicest guys, and the guys you were expecting to be like the good guys, quote unquote, were usually the guys who were the assholes. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they seem like they're the ones that forget where they came from.
Yeah, I mean, that's, of course. I think it's usually like going again, like Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho, if I met him today and I had a Kiss shirt on, he wouldn't look at me twice because he's Chris Jericho now. Back then, he's just some guy on the roster. You know what I mean? Like I still think he was at his regular self. Like, you know what I mean? Like now he's just, you get to that point where in any celebrity probably gets to that point where they're too big to talk to anybody, to common people or whatever.
Yeah, but the big thing is the fact that there are some of them who think they are bigger than what they really are. And then there are some who are big deals, but they don't realize they are. Or they realize it and it doesn't affect them.
Yeah, exactly.
And like you were saying, you didn't know who he was when you were talking to him the first time.
Yeah, I didn't know his name or nothing.
That has been a good thing as far as that conversation and interaction went, because you were treating him like a normal person.
Yeah, I mean, I knew he was a wrestler.
Once you get to a certain point, that has to be refreshing, to have somebody talk to you like a normal person instead of going all fangirl.
Yeah, I'm right. And that was, I mean, if it was somebody else, probably my reaction would have been a little bit different. But again, he was the Lionheart, I think, at that time. And like, I never really seen him before, and like he introduced himself. He's like, "Hey, my name's Chris," and blah blah blah. And I shook his hand, and we had like a 5-minute conversation. And it wasn't even about wrestling; it was about Kiss. Oh man, did they play this song? That I'm like, I told him what they opened up with, and like I'm like, dude, it was awesome. I sat in the second row, it was great. Blah blah. He's like, oh man, it must have been awesome. Like we just had a conversation. It was crazy.
Yes, because I know when they came through our area here, they would do the meet and greets before the shows. And a lot of the guys would come out for the meet and greets with the fans. And there were some that they came through 4 or 5 shows in a row. And it got to where you actually got to know the person a little better. Mm-hmm. And there were some of the guys that were absolutely hilarious. And they would recognize the fans that they saw in return shows.
Yeah.
There were a couple of them that knew me on a first name basis because my mom and I would go to every show that came through. So we would go to the meet and greets and actually sit and talk with the guys, get pictures, get autographs, buy the merch, all that good stuff. And there was one instance that was absolutely hilarious. Like I say, when I hit high school and I got tired of being an outcast and dealing with being stepped on, and I started fighting. And I fought constantly. I got suspended more times than I care to count. And it just so happened that the show that we went to, I had been in a fight the day before. And I went to the show with a black eye. And one of the regular guys that I always made a point of going and talking to at the meet and greets, he recognized me. He made the joke of, oh, what's the other guy look like? And I turned around and I was like, he looks worse than I do. And his jaw just absolutely dropped because he could not believe that I was 90 pounds soaking wet at that point in my life. But I was a scrapper. And me turning around making a point of saying he looks worse than me, that man's jaw just absolutely dropped. Could not believe that this scrawny little girl had been in a fight with a guy and won. It was hilarious.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, I mean, what's the what? Did your book about to cover?
Yes, very much so. It was very much that kind of a thing because I looked like I wouldn't be able to do any damage, but I fought dirty. So I fought dirty. My dad always told me that, in a fight there is no fair.
Well,
The
you
only way
kind of
it's fair is when it's one on one. Then it's a fair fight and anything goes. You use what you've got and do
well.
what you can.
I mean, he's not wrong.
It was, and I'm the oldest of two. My younger sister, she was dad's mini me. It was hilarious. She wanted to be a boy so bad it wasn't even funny. And her favorite thing to walk around when she was 6, 7 years old was kick him in the nuts. And it's like, well, if it comes down to that and the guy is bigger than you are, you do what you have to protect yourself. And that was, she ran around, kick him in the nuts, kick him in the nuts. I'd be watching wrestling, kick him in the nuts.
Maybe she was trying. Maybe she was trying to get a jump on um, population control.
yeah.
Could be,
So
I
here's what
mean,
I want to
most of
know.
the teen guys around here just, yeah, it probably would have been a good thing to sterilize them young. But
What was that, Paul?
So here's what I would know. We know how I got into wrestling. We know how Z got into SL wrestling, or know how Z got into real life wrestling. And
Uh-huh.
you, how did you get into SL wrestling? How did you find it, and how did you get into it?
Okay, so this is going to. Okay, I got into it the way a lot of us got into it. It's somebody tells you about it, right? But when I was first introduced to it, okay, I had to explain this a little bit. At the time, I had a biological son by the name of Sean. Sean is transing into a girl now, as we speak. The transition is going on. So the reason why I say that is because I'm going to do my best, and it's still something that I still struggle. And it's not an intentional thing. It's just make sure that I address her the way that she deserves to be addressed. But I'm just saying that at the time, her name is Sophia. Her name was Sean. So at the time, my son was really big at. I actually got him into wrestling in real life. I mean, he would practice on the trampolines. He was watching everything. He had, all the figures. He had the wrestling rings that he was playing and everything else. Well, when he got old enough, it, invited him to come into SL because I didn't have the best relationships with him or any of my other kids due to various circumstances, some my fault, some not my fault. And that was a way for he and I to kind of bridge the gap at the time that we couldn't spend together. So we would use SL. He had his avatar, I had mine. We still did the whole thing because he was my real life son, now my real life daughter, so it'd be done the same way. Come in, and it was the whole, hey, I created an avatar. I'm going to play a teenager because they were a teenager at the time. And we being the people that I was surrounded with in SL at that time, we had all agreed that when when my son came in, we were going to put some restrictions on him, only because we didn't want him wandering all over SL and getting into something that might potentially be dangerous. Because SL is great, but you still have that side of SL you want to protect innocence from.
Right.
And so there was one day. I got a text message from him, and he's like, "Hey, I'm going to log in." I'm like, "Okay, cool. I'll be in a couple hours." He's like, "Yeah, no problem. I'll be in there." So I log in, and excuse me, and he's all excited, and he starts, his mouth starts going 90 to nothing. He's really excited, and I'm like, whoa, 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 what's going on? And he starts explaining to me that he discovered that SL has wrestling, and believe it or not, the wrestling covered was the original OEW
Oh wow.
because Vince Aftermath has had my real life son at the time, once again, has had my real life son on his OEW roster because I named him Shawn Michael. And the reason why his name is Shawn Michael was because when his mother was pregnant, we had no idea what the name was going to be. We had, and we knew that it was going to be a boy, but we had no idea we were going to name him. And it just so happened that we were watching the WrestleMania, the Iron Man match, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, and Shawn Michaels' music hits, and all of a sudden Shawn starts going ballistic in his mom's belly. It looks like tidal waves going off. Her belly's moving, and he's kicking and he's moving. So that told us was going to name him Shawn Michael. So he comes in and he went in and learned how to wrestle in SL, and he was modeling himself after Shawn Michaels because Shawn Michaels was his favorite wrestler. It didn't really have to do with the name. He just liked the high flying Shawn was doing at the time. So he gets all excited because he's going through this whole thing about learning how to wrestle, learn how to wrestle, learn how to wrestle. And of course, I had no idea, what was going on. So one day I'm like, you're going to have to show me. Just show me. And he took me over to where he was training, and I actually got to watch. I was to watch his training session. And I was like, hey, this is pretty cool. Well, then it wasn't long after that he ended up leaving SL, but I had created an alt, which the alt that you now know as Insidious was actually another alt that we used a name, and his name was Dark Hatred. And the original plan was that because my son wasn't able to voice in SL because he didn't have a microphone, and when I was talking earlier about him going 9-0, it was, we were on the phone because he called me, he was so excited. And I was supposed to have learned how to become a manager so I could actually be my son's manager and be his mouthpiece. That never got to take off because my son had ended up leaving SL and hasn't been back in SL since. But after he left, I really didn't have much of an interest in pursuing it because I was doing it because it was something to spend time with my child. And then it was a few years later, somebody else, and we all know how SL relationships go. Sometimes you end up with these people, that's my sister and this and that, and then all of a sudden you end up somebody calling you dad or somebody calling you mom, and things like that. And at the time, there was a female that I had become friends with through her quote unquote SL mom, and her SL mom and I, way before Z, her SL mom and we didn't partner or anything, but we become a couple, and this girl was doing the SL thing about, you're my dad. If you're going to be with my mom, I'm going to call you dad. I'm like, all right, fine, whatever floats your boat. And she had discovered it. The had discovered it. And she pulled me up one day. She's like, hey, I've got my first wrestling match. Would you want to come to it? And I'm like, sure, I'll go check it out. Because I'd never been to a match. I'd just been to the training. And I'm like, yeah, I'll go to the show and check it out. And I'm watching, and I'm like, this is pretty that you can do stuff like this in SL. You can, and I, at the time I was just in the lag and understanding how SL worked because I was still very young in my SL life. And I think it was, I don't know, about 2 months after that, 2 or 3 months after that, the one that was playing the whole daughter part tells me, hey, thanks for the support, thanks for this. I'm leaving SL Wrestling, I'm going to be a SL. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, good luck and everything. And she was like, well, I'm going to have one last match. Do you want to come and watch it? And I was like, sure. And it just so happened that her last match was in what is now known as Premiere, but at the time it was VAW. And when I went over there for that show, they were doing the sponsor break. Hey, if you've ever been interested in doing this, you've been interested in that, and that, hey, click on this, or you contact this person, and we'll get you set. And that's what happened. And I interested of you ever getting in the ring. I like the commentating part. And but we saw how that kind of ended up. But that is how I got introduced to SL wrestling after becoming an RO wrestling fan. And then, of course, I'm not speaking for Z, but Z simply going to say, hey, it's his fault. That's all she's going to say is his fault.
It really is.
Yeah, it's usually.
I mean, got wrapped up with you, and you were doing it, and I'm sorry you're mine, and I support you in whatever you do, and therefore I'm there. And me not being able to keep my mouth shut, I became just the typical ringside heckler. So
Mine's a little different. So I play this wrestling game. It's a computer game and it's a booking promoter game. So it's called TEW. And what it is you run your own wrestling promotion. You put storylines. You run the show, and then you get like a rating for the show about how good it was. A rating for each segment. They tell you the good and the bad and everything. So one night it was during COVID, and I was on YouTube and I was struggling with like one part of it. I'm like, let me watch some videos on how to do this right, because I kept getting low ratings for like some things that I should have got. I thought I should have got high ratings for. So I'm watching videos of people playing it, explaining it, and then you know how like you're watching a YouTube video and it says like after the video's over and it comes up at like 6 or 7 blocks and it says and it shows different things like what you could click on to watch next.
Yeah.
So it comes up and I'm looking and I see this. It looked like a video game, and I'm like, the hell is this? So I hit it and it was Premier Wrestling. And I'm like, I didn't know anything about Second Life. I didn't know nothing. And I'm like, what the hell? So I'm looking like, what game is this? Because like they're talking and like it was like real interactive. And I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I end up going to their page. I watch a few more of their stuff. I'm like, wow. And then I figure out my son was living with me at the time during COVID. And I'm like, yo, check this thing out. Like I was showing him. He's not even a wrestling fan at all. I was just showing him. Because we would game at night. Like me and he would be downstairs. I'd be upstairs and we would like play video games. He's like, oh, dude, let's check it out. So we signed up for it. We went on. Didn't know what the hell we were doing. Like complete noobs. So I find somehow or another, I don't know how, I remember how I did it. I find Premier Wrestling's arena. So same thing you said. They had like at the time they had like a thing. It was like click here. We want to be a wrestler, all that stuff. So I'm like, what the hell? I hit it. Came up with the thing.
Yeah, because if I'm not mistaken, I was already in Premiere when you came in. So yeah, at that time when they did is when you landed, right? You landed and it had to click this or click that. So you hadn't even been to a show yet, right?
No, I didn't even know. I just seen the arena. I remember going in the arena. After I clicked it and filled everything out, I went in the arena to check it out, and I got in there for like 30 seconds, and they booted me because I didn't have a tag on or whatever. And so anyway, I put the application in. Like a day later, I get Omen, rest his soul. Omen sends me a Discord message. He said, hey, I'm Omen. I'm a trainer, blah, blah, blah. It says we got your application. So I explained to him, I'm like, look, man, like I don't know nothing about SLO, nothing. Like I just, I like wrestling. Or whatever, and he's like, all right, we're going to put you in a call. I'm going to put you in a call later on the day. We'd be available. I'm like, all right. I'm like, wow, man, this is like a real job interview. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, this so. Again, I was so naive to the whole world, So I got on a call with him and Jasmine and Vince Aftermath. And as soon as Vince Aftermath heard me talk, he's like, oh, you got the perfect voice to be, because I didn't want to be a wrestler. I wanted to do commentary. It's like, I want to do commentary, be a manager. I didn't want to do the wrestling aspect of it. So I told him that. I'm like, look, man, I just want to be a wrestler. I don't want to be a wrestler. I want to be a commentator. He's like, oh, you'd be a perfect commentator, blah, blah, blah. We're going to bring you in. We're going to show you around, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, all right, cool. I go online and I meet with Omen. It was the day I met you, that first time, that story we told. And I was only in World. Like I was literally
first meeting.
I was literally still in my new body. Like I didn't even know how to fix my body. I didn't know nothing. And I had this guy show me around.
Yes, our infamous first meeting.
Well, yeah, I'm from Philly, so I already have like, fuck that guy attitude. You know what I mean? So I remember me and Omen going to the training area, and we were talking in World, and he's like, hey, you got to shut your mic off when we're doing the training area because people are, training and everything. I get it. I was having issues with my mic, and you come walking over, and Omen's like, "Hey, BK, this is a new commentator." I don't even know if my name was Paul Slater at the time. It was ever my new name was. I don't even remember what it was. And
I don't remember if you had. I don't remember if you had the Paul Slater part of the. But I do remember it was
didn't.
You've always been Paul.
Yeah,
you've always been Paul.
And that was the confusing part of me, because I'm like, I just made up a name, not thinking that none of this was going to come to fruition. I just made up a name thinking, oh, let me try it, like, whatever. I don't remember what my name was, but anyway, he introduces it, whatever the name was, and you're like, hey, man, how you doing? And I couldn't, my mic was on. I couldn't get it turned back on. And he's like, great, another commentator, don't talk. See you later. And walks away. And I'm like, fuck that guy. Who the fuck is that guy? So Omen's like, hey, man, don't. Omen sends me a text, a DM, and he's like, hey, man, don't. BK's like that. He's a nice guy. He's like that. Don't worry. Don't take it. I'm like, nah, man, I'm cool. Whatever. So my thing was, I remember, and this is, I probably never told you this part. The first show, they put me on the show. Vince wants to put me on the show. It's like the next day. I'm still in my new body. And Vince is like, we don't usually do this. We don't usually do day one, people coming in here. He's like, but I got a feeling that you're going to be really good. And like, he said that to me. And I'm like, all right, man. Like, and again, I never did this before. So I remember starting the first show. It was like a house show. And Omen's like, hey, man, to make you feel more comfortable. Because I was talking to Omen like that whole day. He's like, to make you feel, and I always respected him for doing this for me. I'm going to do commentary. I don't usually do commentary, but I'm going to do commentary with you to make you feel more comfortable. And it was me, him, and Pagan.
Mm-hmm.
And, sorry, I'm getting a cold, so. And,
you're fine.
So we did a show, and literally right after the show, he's like, man, he did great. I remember going right before it, and I'm like kind of nervous, and I'm like, and I remember saying to myself, these fucking people don't know who I am. Like, I'm just going to go and completely turn the nozzle up to 20. You know what I mean? And that's what I did. And that's what I still do today. And I did pretty good. And Vince was there. And Vince hits me up right away. Hey, I want you to be our one of our lead commentary people on our show on Mondays, because they didn't have the Thursday show. I don't remember. It was just one show. I'm like, all right, cool. Some people, I learned really quick. Some people got upset about that. So, I remember doing.
Trust me, I was not one of them.
Right. No, I know. But the other one was a female that got upset about it. I ain't going to mention any names, but. So, I remember doing the first show, and you were in the crowd or somewhere, and you were saying shit to me like, this guy Paul sucks. So now I'm still in that fuck this guy mode. Who the fuck is this guy? And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to turn it up now. And I remember I started talking shit back to you. I said something back to you, whatever. Mm-hmm. We had like a little bit of a back and forth. Again, we didn't really know each other or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it was like you were like the motivation almost to me. But like, yeah, fuck this guy, man. I'm going to show him what I'm about. Like, I'm going to show him my goddamn mic works. And
well, the whole thing that is, and you're absolutely right. It was completely hilarious because we did not know each other. Because we'll get into this at another time because we're almost out of time. But really quick, and you can elaborate on this. What shocked me the most was, at the time when you come in, I was playing a face because there was Ace and oh my God, who's that? He was in that. God, I can't even remember the name of the guy he was in the feud with. But the guy he was in the feud with had a partner. She was in there too, and it was one of those things that Ace was trying everything he could. I was always trying to come in. The story was set up where I was supposed to come in, doing everything I can to help the guy. I got the guy's back. It's Ace. You're wrong. Get out of my. This and everything else. And then when it all culminated in the Supercard, that's when I made a heel turn because then I actually ended up helping Ace beat this person for the belt. I come out the next week and I pulled my very first ever heel promo.
Yep.
And that was the one where I never coined the phrase.
Sheeple.
Yes, I never coined the phrase. I'd heard it somewhere else, and just to me, it just was fitting. And that's when I cut that very first ever heel promo where I about everybody without really calling out names. It was after I did that, you come in and said, "Dude, we need to talk."
Yeah.
It was after I cut that heel promo. It was after I cut the heel. I mean, even Vince, I remember that. Vince said, "Man, that was good." But I cut that heel promo, and it was like right after the show, you're like, "Hey, dude, we need to talk." And it was after that we talked, and that's when we realized how much of wrestling fans we really were.
Well, and not only that, but like the one thing that you and I share is like we love writing storylines. And like I'm like I like and the one thing that you were like me in a way, or we're similar in a way, is we like pushing envelope and we like blurring the lines. We like, doing things that nobody else does, and like, because I mean, again, I get it with some people. Like the one thing I learned pretty early in SL was like, I'm not going to I don't know these people. I don't know none of these people. They don't know me behind the screen. So it's like, you can say whatever you want to me. You could call me any name in the book. You could call me anything. I ain't going to care. You don't know me. You don't know anybody. But I'm going to embrace it, and I'm going to use it. And then that's what I did. And you were kind of similar in that way. I picked up, like, you didn't really got personal. Like, hey, man, I don't know why you said that in that promo or whatever. Like, it was like, yo, man, let's just go out and do it. Let's just, whatever happens, happens. And we were similar in that way. It's like storytelling and everything like that, where a lot of the people at the time, until you and I really talked, were like, look, I don't want to say we came from different generations.
Oh, I'm an asshole. I'm an asshole. Don't
well, no, it's not even. No.
Call me an asshole.
It's not being an asshole. It's like, it's a generation. I think in SL, in some areas, there's a generational gap. You and I grew up in the Hulk Hogan era. We grew up in the NWA era. But then you had people that you're talking to, that you're doing storylines with, that grew up in the John Cena era. So I'm talking about doing this and talking about real life stuff, and they're like, hey, man, like, I just want to be the good guy, and, and you know what I mean? Like, you have that generational gap where people I don't want to say they don't understand. Like, they just don't have that same philosophy as like, the more we push, the more people are going to.
Right, but another philosophy, and like I said, we're about to be out of time here. I know you're, about your years and all that, but really quick. But one of the other things that, and I don't want to say that it's all throughout SL wrestling, because that means that I'd be talking about everybody. So I'm not doing that. But I will say that throughout my span, throughout the different feds that I've been in, you had those ones that it's like, oh no, people only know me as a face. People are not going to accept that I'm nothing but a face, or people are not going to accept that I'm nothing but a heel. It's like, that might be what you think, but you have to understand, at some point in time, people are going to grow tired of it. Look what happened to Hulk Hogan. Eventually, people got tired of say your prayers, eat your vitamins. And what did he do? He turned around and turned into Hollywood Hulk Hogan. What happened to The Undertaker? He was the Undertaker. He was the dead man. He was the Undertaker. Then he became the American Badass. Then he turned around and turned back into the Undertaker, and then he really turned back into the Undertaker. Yeah. So you can be you. You just have to change your attitude about it.
Me and you talked about this in the last episode. Every time I started turning face, people would not let me be face. Turn face. Well, I've been a heel since day one.
I'm not going to lie to you. If it was one of those things where it didn't matter what fed you were in, if you're like, hey, I don't care what you guys do, I want Brian or Big K to write my stories, I wouldn't turn you face either.
We tried that. We tried that.
We did. And it did, because we tried that with the Hal story, because that was the whole twist of the thing, was you were trying to be a face, and of course we knew the twist at the end was Insidious was going to show up and was going to attack Hal, and we knew that was what, but you played it right. You wouldn't try to do the whole thing where it's like, hey, I know that I was a heel last week, but this week you guys got to start liking me. You were playing the part.
Yeah.
You are so fucking good at playing the heel part, and you don't even have to try. You're just you.
It's naturally now.
It's the attitude that you project, that you're gonna. It doesn't matter, and people are gonna love you no matter what. People are gonna love Paul, no matter what you are. Because I mean, look at Kurt Hennig, or excuse me, not Kurt Hennig, Kurt Angle. That whole thing with his music, he used to get pissed off and get upset when people would say "you suck."
Yeah.
But he played to that. and he played to it that he didn't like it, so people disliked him more because they wasn't agreeing with him. Now when he goes out, they do it, and it's a compliment, it's a sign of respect.
Yeah.
People not buying you, or I shouldn't say not buying, but people not looking at you as anything other than a heel because of how you take the heat and how you give the heat and everything you've done. That's a compliment.
Oh yeah, I mean, I said it's
It really is.
yeah, it's. I mean, I enjoy it. I like a lot of people I met. There's a lot of people I met who were like, they think I'm the same person. I'm like, dude, I'm totally different than that person on screen. You know what I mean? I'm not.
I mean,
an
you can
asshole
be.
like that. Yeah, I mean, sometimes.
You could be.
But
Yeah, you could be, because I do the same thing.
yeah, but as far as going back to you and me, when we started, like we wanted to do. That's how we talked about it last week. That's how you and I started working together. Is just that common interest in things in SL, which started at Premiere, which we left Premiere to do what we wanted to do because there really wasn't, not to say it wasn't a spot for us, but they didn't really have that opening for us to do anything in Premiere, which is like one of the reasons the first time when we left and we went to Fusion, we went to OEW, and then we did what we did. But that's how I started.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I've been in the same body since day one. I don't know how to change anything on my body. I have the same tattoos. I have the same look. I literally just like 3 months ago figured out how to change my body shape, and I did that. So I know people saying to me like, "Oh, you should do." Dude, don't ask me to change my body because I'm like, this petrifies me. I'm just keeping it the same.
That's why I have Z.
Yeah.
That's why I have Z. I'll send her a message on Discord, or I'll send her a message, or I'll even call her and say, "I bought something. Go fix me."
But it's also the continuity.
I don't even try to go through.
I'm big on continuity. The one thing I learned like from Chris Jericho, listen to him talk, is like, especially like when I was the pretty boy in Premiere. All right, and then we went to Fusion. I was still the pretty boy, and then I'm like, man, like we remember we started the Insidious stuff. I'm like, I got to change it. I got to get rid of this pretty good boy thing. And then we did the Slater gimmick, and then that led to the thing I do now with the Scumbag Superstar thing. And then like the Scumbag Superstar, real quick before how that came about is, it's funny because I remember when I told him, I left Premiere a second time. I was going through a lot of stuff. My father passed away. I was dealing with a lot of real life issues, and like my tolerance for things was just like very, very short. And I needed to get away and like for myself. So I'm not going to mention who it was, but I got a guy Izo from a friend of mine when I left Premiere, and they called me a scumbag. He's a scumbag. He just left. So I mean, it didn't bother me. I'm like, whatever, So when I was coming back, when I was thinking about coming back, and I remember I was talking to Lex and Heather, Lex Amanga and Heather, and they're like, what are you gonna, like, how are you coming back? I'm like, I got an idea. I want to be the Scumbag Superstar. And they're like, what the hell does that even mean? I'm like, I'm a scumbag, but I'm a superstar, and I'm gonna embrace being a scumbag. You know what I mean? Like, and they knew why like that happened, and then like I created this whole gimmick. Really, it's not even a gimmick. It's just been me the whole time, and they just added a scumbag to it. And then, leading into that, it was just like, but again, that goes back to what I just said a few minutes ago, as far as call me anything I want, I'm going to embrace it. You know what I mean? I'm glad they didn't call me like a shithead or something. I don't know how to play that out, but they called me a scumbag, and then like I used it. I don't take it personal. I'm like, all right, what I did was wrong. I left, and I was at the time, my life at the time was in a mess, a little bit of a mess, and I left, and I did what I had to do. But yeah, and I embraced it, and then that was, that's how the Scumbag Superstar started. But like I always try to change myself everywhere I get, like a little bit, like tweak something to make me look different or to make something appear different. But that's just the way I do things.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of episode number 2. Also, look down in the descriptions, and you will be able to get in contact with us. There will be a link for, well, actually, it's going to be Paul's. You're putting your account up right now, but then we're going to over and make a account for the show. So
I'm going to make an X account, and then I will put it up. We'll have it next week.
Okay, and then we do have a Discord. We can put that in here. We do have the Discord for that.
Yep.
So hopefully you all enjoy this. Let us know, and also one thing that some people may not know about this, and we're actually talking about possibly having on-air guests.
Yes.
And since hopefully we have a lot of people, we have some people in mind that we want to talk to first. But let's just do this. Why don't we give the people an opportunity? Why don't we let them tell us who they think that who would they want to hear from?
Yeah.
Let's let them get involved with this. Go down there, leave your comments, or if you happen to join the Discord, go in there and say, hey, I think, with an interesting story would be this person, and then we see who, the majority of the people vote for, and then we'll see if we can get that person on. And that's, let our people also be involved in this. It's not just about us.
Yeah, that works good. All right.
All right. Well, ladies, go ahead. Take it, Bob.
I'll see you next week. I was going to say I'll see you next week.
All right. We will see you guys very soon. Z, always great to work with you. And yes, I know where I sleep. And if I mess up, you. Yeah.
And one thing we learned today: don't mess with Z because you'll end up looking worse than she does.
Yeah. Don't mess with Z because you'll be the one that everybody's going to say, "What the other guy look like?"
I got my ass kicked by Z more than any other woman in SL.
All right.
All right. See you next week.
All right. You all have a good one, and we will see you all next week.